number 3. The name of this book is King David. Sometime after David had killed Goliath, he lived in the king's palace. He became friends with Saul's son Jonathan. Saul the king sent David to fight with the Philistines again. And when David returned from the battle, Saul heard the women singing, "Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Then Saul was angry and jealous. The next time David played before him, Saul tried to kill him with a spear. See the spear by King Saul's hand? Turn. Jonathan said to his father Saul, "David is good and wise, and he's done you no harm. Why do you want to shed his innocent blood?" Then Paul said, "No, he shall not be killed." David came back to live in the king's palace, and Saul gave him his daughter Michal as a wife. But later Saul's anger and jealousy rose in him again, and while David was playing the harp, Saul threw a spear, meaning to pin him to the wall, but David slipped away and fled to his house. Turn. Saul sent messengers to watch David's house at night. They meant to kill him in the morning. Michal, his wife, told him that he must escape, and she let him down out of a window in the darkness. Michal made a figure lying on David's bed with a pillow of goat's hair for the head. When Saul's messengers came the next morning, she told them David was ill. But Saul sent them back to fetch David in his bed so that he could be killed. And then the messengers saw how Michal had tricked them. Turn. For a long time David had to stay in hiding because of Saul's anger against him. He stayed in the wilderness, and Saul gave Michal, David's wife, to be married to another man. One night David left the wilderness and came to the camp of Saul's army. He saw Saul asleep in a trench with his spear stuck in the ground beside him. Abner, the captain of his army, was there too, and David took the spear and a jar of water and left Saul unharmed. Then he went to the top of the high hill, and he called out so that everyone could hear him, "Why do you pursue me with all these men?" Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back to me, my son David." David said, "Look, here is your spear and your jar of water. I could have killed you while you slept, but I did not want to harm God's anointed king." Turn. The war between Israel and the Philistines was still raging. Saul thought that the Philistines would be too strong for him, and when he asked God to guide him, God did not answer. So Saul disguised himself and went to Endor, where a witch lived. He said, "I want to speak to the spirit of Samuel, who is dead." The woman said, "The king has forbidden us to call up spirits. You will get me into trouble." Saul promised that no trouble should come to her, and the woman called upon the spirit of Samuel. But Samuel did not comfort Saul. He told Saul that he had disobeyed God and that David would be the next king of Israel instead of one of Saul's sons. Turn. Soon after this, the Philistines were victorious. In one battle, they killed Jonathan and 2 more of Saul's sons. When Saul knew of this, he did not want to live any longer, and he killed himself. A messenger came to tell David that Saul and Jonathan both were dead. Then David wept and tore his clothes and mourned. It looks like he cried, doesn't it? Turn. This was David's lament, or this was his cry. "The beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away." Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put ornaments of gold upon your apparel. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been to me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? Turn. Now that Saul was dead, Israel needed a new king, but the country was divided. David was made king of Judah and ruled at Hebron, but Abner, the captain of Saul's army, made one of Saul's other sons king of Gilead, and of the Asherites and the rest of Israel. There was a long war between these two sides, and David became stronger and stronger, and Saul's son became weaker. Abner and Saul's son quarreled, so Abner sent secretly to David, saying, "I'll help you to become king of all Israel." David said, "Very well, but you must let me have Michal, my wife." When Abner brought Michal to David, David made a feast for him and let him go again in peace. Turn. When Joab, the captain of David's army, heard of Abner's visit, he was furious. He said to David, "Why did you let Abner go away in peace? You know he came to spy on you, to find out your plans, so that he and his army could defeat us." Then Joab sent messengers to ask Abner to meet him in Hebron, but he did not tell David. And when Abner came to the gate of the city, Joab took him aside as if he wanted to speak to him alone, but then he stabbed him in the heart. David wept when he heard this. He said, "I'm not guilty of this murder." He told all the people to mourn with him for Abner. Turn. Not long after Abner's death, Saul's son was also murdered. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are of your bone and flesh. You should rule over us all." So David became king of all Israel. Now David brought the ark of the Lord to Jerusalem. He made burnt sacrifices, and he himself danced with all his might before the ark. His wife Michal looked out of her window and saw David dancing, and she laughed and mocked him and said, "You were shameless dancing in front of all the people." God was angry with Michal for this, and she did not have any children. Turn. One day when David was walking on the roof of his palace, he saw a very beautiful woman in another house. He asked who she was, and his servant said, "That is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah." David wanted to have Bathsheba as his own wife. He did a very mean thing. He sent a message to Joab, the captain of his army, saying, "Send Uriah the Hittite to see me." When Uriah had come to the palace, David wrote a letter to Joab and told Uriah to carry it back to the battlefront. The letter said, "Put Uriah in the front of the battle with the bravest of men, so that he's certain to be killed." Turn. Joab did as David had asked, and many of the bravest men were killed in the battle. Uriah died too. Joab sent messengers to David, saying, "The enemy shot from the city wall, and many men died. Your servant Uriah died too." When Bathsheba heard that Uriah had died, she mourned for him. But after her mourning was over, David took her as his wife, and they had a baby son. Turn. Because of this sin of David's, God sent Nathan the prophet to tell him this story. There were two men in a city. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man had herds of cattle and sheep, but the poor man had only one ewe lamb which he loved. A traveler came to the city to be feasted, but the rich man did not kill one of his own herd for the feast. He took away the ewe lamb from the poor man. And David was angry when he heard the story, and he said, "The rich man was wicked. He deserved to die." Nathan said, "You're that man. You had Uriah killed because you wanted his wife for yourself." Turn. Then David saw that he had sinned, and God punished him by making Bathsheba's child fall sick. For days David would not eat. He prayed that his child might be made well again. But after 7 days, the child died. David's servants were surprised to see David wash himself and eat again. They said, "You went without food and wept while the child was alive. Now he's dead. Why don't you still weep and fast?" David said, "While the child was alive, God might have cured him. Now he's dead. There's no more to hope for. I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." After some time, Bathsheba bore David another son. His name was Solomon, and he would be the next ruler of Israel. And that's the end.